wanted to welcome you to this webinar sponsored by UPF and the Washington Times. This is the second one in our International Leadership Conference series. And this is specifically focusing on business and economics development. It's the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. And the title of this webinar is Possibilities for Business and Economic Development in Korean Reunification. And we have a great lineup of speakers today. And my name is Roger Wetherall. I am the coordinator for IAED within the United States. And I'll be the moderator for the program today. And before we get into the main part of the presentation, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is the president of UPF International and the chairman of the Washington Times Holdings. He's going to say a few words of introduction about IAED and UPF. Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Roger. I'm very honored to welcome all of our participants that are on YouTube and have registered on the webinar. We thank you for joining the Universal Peace Federation and the Washington Times Foundation and this program that's looking at the situation of the Korean Peninsula from the point of view of business and economic engagement. We've had a number of Washington Times fact finders to Korea, to Japan, and to the region. And we have been briefed by everyone from the committees of the Korean National Assembly to the Japanese Diet to the US Congress, as well as our US Embassy. And we found that the situation of North Korea is unique in the whole world. It is the most controlled and most directed economy on earth. And it is also heavily supported by its relation to its neighbor, North Korea, its neighbor to the north, to China. And about 70% of its revenue comes from China through some kind of trade, selling coal or various items. The UN sanctions have cut a lot of that down, but we found that also that money that was reduced from refusing coal shipments as prescribed by the sanctions was actually leveled out and equaled by other subsidies from China. There is some trade with South Korea, and then there's also the trade on the black market. One of the intriguing things that we found was that the North Korean people have an economy all of their own. And it wasn't until the last 10 or 15 years that a kind of localized barter economy sprung up so the people could survive. And interestingly, the most powerful currency in North Korea is the US dollar. And through human beings' desire for happiness and also health and to avoid starvation, they creatively have manifested all kinds of cottage industries and cottage bartering. And that has kept the communities somewhat in a survival mode. That's why the idea of opening up trade is linked to also helping North Korea see a peaceful transition from a defensive nation that sees everyone to the south and other than Russia and China as arch enemies. And even North Korea sees China not in the most friendly terms, but they depend on China. But that's why the business component here is critical. Of course, there's the other components of humanitarian exchange and cultural exchange. And there's also the political element too. These things are critically important. I welcome you to this program. I think our business leaders here will be able to give us very interesting insights on how the process of engagement through positive trade, positive development can open up the door. And we look forward to a day that something like what happened with East and West Germany can occur between North and South Korea. One thing that Ambassador Christopher Hill, the former ambassador to Korea from the United States, mentioned was that the number one thing that America can do to help North and South Korea come together is to give China a clear understanding of how a unified Korea will work and how it will not just simply be a staging ground for US forces to oppose China. So that vision of what North and South Korea can be and should be is critical. And the business element of that is also critical for a better nation that could be a peaceful neighbor to all. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Roger, and to all of our panelists. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. That was a great introduction to the program. It's, I think, the impact of China on the reunification of North and South Korea is going to be a huge thing that we need to consider going forward, especially from an economic standpoint. Next up, I'd like to introduce a really great friend of mine. Mr. Tom McDivitt has been, instrumental in getting IAED organized and getting us all together, and leading a lot of the thought that goes into creating the intention and the purpose of the organization. So I'd like to introduce him as he's been with the Washington Times news company since 1994. He served a term as the Senior VP of Marketing at the Points of Light Foundation, which was an organization launched by President George H.W. Bush in 2019. He was appointed as a chairman of the H.J. Magnolia Foundation, and he has a whole lot of other things that he has done as well. But I think one of the things he's most proud of recently is that he put together a global media company, the Washington Times Global Media Company, to publish the English and Spanish language versions of Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon's memoir, which I have a copy of here as well. And it's a great read. If anybody hasn't read it yet, please get a copy and go through it. It's very inspiring. So, Tom, would you like to say a few words to us?
Thank you so much, Roger. Great to see you again. And I remember our visits up near the University of Bridgeport there. It's good to see so many friends on the call here too, on the webinar. And thank you for joining. We'd like everybody that's tuning in through the Zoom call or through YouTube, please consider getting involved with IAED, because I think this project of UPF is really going to go places. And it's also great to see my good friends, Colonel Al Short and Congressman Cliff Stearns and Dr. William Imeke from Columbia University. We were all together in Korea where IAED was launched. It's the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. And our group, our project is one of 6 associations that are sponsored by UPF. You have the Parliamentarian Network, the Interreligious Network, the academics, the media, the business, and the heads of state and first ladies. So it's a fascinating grand strategy that's evolving all over the world in about 160 countries. And we really look forward to growing IAED, a business network of people interested in the concept that business and commerce and economy can have a higher purpose, that we can not only do well financially, but we can also make a higher good for society. So we started in Korea in February of this year. We're planting roots in all regions of the world. And the vision of IAED is to really to build a world of peace, prosperity, mutual prosperity, interdependence, and based on those core universal values. The mission of IAED is to attract business, government, and innovative economic thought leaders who can collectively impact society by working together, education programs, professional development programs, and most importantly, collaborating on the local, regional, and even global level on solving critical problems from the unique perspective that the business world can bring, especially in terms of innovation, technology, foreign direct investment, et cetera. And therefore, when you look at the world, there's certain hotspots. And as many have said, the Korean Peninsula is of the top, if not the most urgent issue. As President Obama handed off the White House to President Trump, he said that the #1 geopolitical issue is going to be the North Korea matter. So we're looking at the Korean Peninsula from the future perspective of economic development. That's why we really appreciated guys like Jim Rodgers, who is really bullish on investing in the future of Korea, and others like that. So the work that ID is taking on has really got 3 core dimensions. And again, I invite everyone who's tuning in to get involved at some level. Start paying attention to this. #1 is the area of thought leadership and development of a point of view that can be implemented through training programs and things like that. #2 is the essential value of business leaders, men and women, young and old, all over the world, all different races and backgrounds, working together. That community and network of business leaders that share common values can make a big, big difference. Who knows what kind of things can develop there. And thirdly, that IAED as a network on its different levels can make impact in society. So I really appreciate you all being involved. We've got some great people talking today. And Roger, congratulations on your leadership. And we really want to help you grow the US. I'm helping people in Africa and Europe and Asia and Latin America and all over the place. So America's got a great role to play. And again, thanks for giving us a chance to get everyone together. God bless, and everybody stay healthy and pay attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was a great introduction. Before we get into the main content today, I just have a little background information that I would like to share to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. Just wanted to go through the current situation of the 2 Koreas, North and South Korea. So as probably everybody knows, Korea was occupied by Japan from 1905 to 1945. And there was a lot of oppression, and this created a lot of resentment against the Japanese. And then at the end of the Second World War, the country was split administratively between Russia and the US. And that led to the US setting up a democratic government in the South, and then in North Korea, Kim Il-sung was put into power and began the communist government in North Korea. Then in 1950, he attacked South Korea in order to try and unify the 2 Koreas. And this resulted in an intervention by the United Nations and a devastating war that lasted for 4 years. That war was finally concluded with an armistice, but a peace treaty was never signed between these 2 Koreas, and there has been continued hostility and aggression between these 2 countries over the last 70 years. Many people have actually died during this so-called peace period. So it's 70 years now since the Korean War started, and most Koreans today who are alive have no memory of a unified Korea. All of those people who fought in the war and who lived, in a Korea that was united, many of them have passed away. Those who are old were there when they were very young. So we're kind of facing a crucial point today in, if we're going to bring about this unification of Korea, then we need to do it soon. So if we look at a comparison between these 2 countries, we can see, South Korea and North Korea roughly have the same area, but in terms of population, South Korea has nearly double the population of the North. And South Korea has a much older population. So their median age is about 42 years compared to 34 years. That's a 10-year difference. Part of this is due to the life expectancy in the 2 countries. We have 82 years in South Korea compared to 71 years in the North. But it's also due to the low fertility rate. So South Korea has only 1.27 children per woman, whereas North Korea, 1.94. So there is a declining population of young people actually in both countries. If we move on to look at the economic side of things, though, the differences are much greater. So South Korea has approximately $1.64 trillion as of 2019 compared to 30 billion for North Korea. So North Korea's got a 2% of the South Korean GDP. And if you look at the per capita comparison there, we've got 39,500 per person in South Korea compared to only $1,700 per person in North Korea. Interestingly, though, both countries list China as their largest export and import partners. Of course, for South Korea has many other partners, but North Korea does most of its business, 86% on export, 91% on import, is with China. And this is, of course, is because of their shared cultural heritage in many respects, and also because of the large border area that they share with the country. There have been attempts over the last 70 years to, create economic cooperation between North and South Korea. So there was the Kaesong Industrial Complex that was set up, the Mount Kumgang Tourist Region, which operations are now suspended in that area due to political concerns. But all of these attempts have only resulted in a very small increase in the ability for these two countries to interact economically. And they have not had any kind of flow-on effects into the larger economy of North Korea in terms of creating, cooperation and increasing business. So that is, there's also the Rason Free Trade Zone, which is set up mostly to facilitate trade with Russia, which is just to the north of the country here. And this has had some impact. It's been going since 1991 and has enabled Korea to continue to build its relationships with, so North Korea can build its relationships with Russia. So with that kind of background in mind, I would like to introduce our first panelist for today. And this is very honored to be able to welcome, the Honorable Cliff Stearns to our panel today. He was served as a member of the House of Representatives from 1989 to 2013. And during that time, he was the primary liaison between the US House and the European Parliament. He had a lot of international experience. He has a broad experience in the telecommunications industry and in international trade, and currently serves as the executive director and member of the International Advisory Council for APCO, which is an international communications consultancy firm. He has also served in the US Air Force, where he received the Air Force Commendation Medal. So, Cliff, would you like to speak and offer us your thoughts on North and South Korea?
Yeah, Roger, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm down here in Florida enjoying the wonderful weather here, and I appreciate your kind words. I'm reminded in Florida when I was at a peanut convention, I was introduced by the chairman. He said Cliff Stearns was born in a hospital to be near his mother at an early age. Cliff. So that was my introduction at that time. So that was probably the shortest introduction I ever got. Let me compliment you for your presentation there. Of course, we're looking at the 70th anniversary of since the outbreak of the Korean War, and it's exhilarating to think what this discussion is about. And I commend the United Peace Federation, the Washington Times Foundation for putting this on, their foresight, their clairvoyance, for thinking about it in these terms. The possibilities for North Korea are exhilarating, and I think that all of us have to pursue that, because the alternatives are, one, there could be a collapse in North Korea like there was in the Soviet Union, or possibly there could be a transition, is what we're hoping for, bringing in economic development and bringing in diplomats and entrepreneurs to make it happen. Or lastly, it could be more serious than that, into a military engagement. So I think what the sponsors of this dialogue are to be commended for thinking ahead here. When I think about the unification of North and South Korea, I have to go back in history and look at what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union and how that was handled by the United States. And also, as you mentioned, the East and West Germany reunification, how that occurred, and what were the problems that were overcome by the governments. And all of us should also remember in the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, those three countries were under and dominated by the Soviet Union, and they became independent and they transmitted into free markets. And it was really impressive the way they became independent of the Soviet Union. At the same time, they also were, shall we say, respected human rights. So when I think of the possibilities here, as I say, it's very impressive. I think what I'll talk about just briefly about is the two things that I think you mentioned earlier in the digest of this, and that's talking about the special breed of entrepreneurs and diplomats that are needed. And that's what's really needed to bring this about, diplomats. Some of the diplomats that I think historically have made a difference is Llewellyn Thompson. He was involved with the Cuban Missile Crisis under President Kennedy. He did an extraordinarily good job there. Then, of course, Lawrence Eagleburger, he persuaded Israel not to get involved with the Persian Gulf War. So you need diplomats of that kind of skill and integrity to bring this about, this transition, what we need to move North Korea to the free markets. And then, of course, you need these special entrepreneurs. And before I came to Congress, Roger, I owned and operated motels and restaurants. So I have sort of a feel for that real estate development, which is going to be very important for North Korea. And if you had entrepreneurs like Conrad Hilton or J. Willard Marriott or Ray Kroc in McDonald's, you can see if men of that caliber could feel comfortable going into North Korea and feel, one, that they could invest their money and not have a problem with investing their money. So that's one of the key, is to set up some kind of structure so that investors can invest their money very easily. And another thing they have to set up is confidence that you buy and sell under contracts with the judiciary that'll make it easier for it to do that. And of course, you have to have the conversion of the state-owned housing and land so that it can move to private ownership. So those are some of the things that you have to think about. But I think what we see in the Baltic and what we saw in East and Western Germany, that I think really we're able to establish a rule of law and property rights, and ultimately a theoretical model for all of us to convince North Korea it can be done. Strategically, it'll make the country into a whole new ally between North and South Korea. And then the trading opportunities for them will just open up. I noticed, Roger, in your list of slides that you did not have India as one of the import to North Korea. But that country, with its huge population and its democracy, would be a key for that country as they evolve into one country. I'll conclude by saying that North and South Korea as one country would be a world player. They would have no huge defense armament, so they'd be safe, they'd be an ally, and ultimately they'd be a rich nation. You pointed out the population is about 55 million in South Korea and about 25 or so in North Korea. So you have 80 million people. They'd be rich, and they would be starting to trade with China and India. And so it'd be a huge mental transition for the world and for North and South Korea. And I'm just delighted to participate in this panel and be on this distinguished panel with other members. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you very much. They were great opening comments for the program today. So next, we're going to move to Singapore. So Our next speaker is not able to join us in person. He's living in Singapore currently, but Mr. Jim Rodgers gave a very excellent presentation at our World Summit earlier this year. And we are going to play that for all of those people who are unable to hear his comments at the World Summit, where he talked very directly about the potential opportunities of North-South investment once these countries open up and start working together. So Jim Rodgers is an American businessman and financial commentator, and chairman of Beeland Interests, and he was the founder of the Quantum Fund and Source Fund Management. So he has, is so bullish on Asia that he moved his entire family to Singapore in order to prepare for this transition where the world is moving towards Asia. So we have a video presentation and we are going to roll that now.
I am delighted to be here. I am especially delighted to be here on the Korean Peninsula. You know, every male alive on the Korean Peninsula today has spent his whole life worrying about getting killed. Everybody. Because for the last 75 or 80 years, there's been the threat of war on the Korean Peninsula. Can you imagine? I mean, I'm not Korean, so I haven't lived with this threat hanging over my head, but it's been going on a long time. And can you also imagine how much money South Korea has spent on defense in the past 75 years? Can you imagine how much money North Korea has spent on defense in the past 75 years? Both of these countries have spent staggering amounts of money, especially in the North, because that's their main emphasis, spending on defense. This is going to come to an end soon, in my view. And once the North stops spending so much money on defense, and the South stops spending so much money on defense, there's going to be a huge pool of capital which can go to develop the North and the South. There are huge potential assets on the entire Korean Peninsula. So this is going to happen soon, at least in my view, because there's a different mindset in the South and in the North. Russia's in favor of this, China's in favor of this, North Korea's in favor of it, South Korea's in favor of it. You all know President Moon would like to solve this problem. Some of us are subject to censorship, but the President Kim in the North has made many speeches saying that he wants to do for North Korea what Deng Xiaoping did for South Korea, what Deng Xiaoping did for China, and you all know what happened in China when they opened up and we had huge potential development. That's coming. Hanbando, the Korean Peninsula, is soon going to be the single most exciting place in the world. Once the 38th parallel is open, you will see huge amounts of capital come to the Korean Peninsula. In the South, they have capital. They know how to manufacture and develop economies. In the North, they have huge amounts of cheap, educated, disciplined labor. They also have lots of natural resources. You know, as recently as 1970, North Korea was richer than South Korea. Well, communism and the Kims can ruin anything, and they ruined North Korea. But now, President Kim wants to have a new life, a new country. South Korea is ready for change. Russia's ready for change. China's ready for change. Japan is against it because they don't want to compete with an open Korea. But it's coming, and when it comes, you can tell all of the males in Korea, on the Korean Peninsula, you don't have to worry about getting killed anymore, because we're going to have peace on the Korean Peninsula. There's some more changes that have to be made in Washington and other places, but when it comes, this conference is in favor of interdependence. You're going to have perfect interdependence on the Korean Peninsula, which is going to lead to great prosperity. I want to say again, the single most exciting place in the world is going to be the Korean Peninsula once the 38th parallel is open. In my view, that's coming. There is new thinking in this part of the world. Not enough yet, but it's coming. And when it comes, once you have prosperity and peace in Northeastern Asia, including Japan, it's going to lead to a lot more interdependence. You know, right now there's a huge movement afoot to build a tunnel from Japan to Korea. Can you imagine one day you can get in your car in Tokyo and drive to London? You can get in your car in Tokyo and drive to London. People like me who are a little nuts and love adventure are going to do that. I'm going to get my daughters, we're going to get in our car in Tokyo and drive to London through the tunnel, through South Korea, through North Korea, through Russia, and through China, and off we go. So there is a huge change coming. It's in process. It's not here completely yet because some more thinking has to change. Thank you. But please, I hope that everybody here, if we can solve the problem of Northeast Asia, if we can solve the problem of peace in Northeast Asia, which can be solved on the Korean Peninsula and Japan and Russia and China, this will be an unbelievably exciting place with lots of prosperity, lots of interdependence. And once you have prosperity and interdependence, you will have universal values. Everybody can sing and dance and dine and drink together and no longer worry about shooting each other and killing each other. So I'm very much in favor of interdependence, mutual prosperity, universal values, and peace in Northeast Asia. Thank you.
So our next speaker is somebody that I've just gotten to know in the last couple of weeks, Colonel Short, Albert Short, or Al Short, has 40 years of experience working constructively with foreign governments. He's lived in many different countries in the world, especially in Asia, Japan, Vietnam, Singapore, and Brunei, and also in Africa. So as somebody with this kind of international experience, I'm really looking forward to hearing his perspective on communications and setting up business relationships between countries that may not necessarily agree on everything. So this would be an interesting discussion. So take it away.
Thank you, Roger. First of all, thank you for the introduction, but also to UPF and IAED for setting up this program. I listened to the morning discussion, and I think that previous session set the stage for what we're going to talk about this afternoon. And in reality, it pointed out the possibilities for Korean reunification in the short term or remote. And I think one could make the case there's less optimism today than when I was in the East Asia Bureau at State in the early 90s, and we were conducting negotiations with the leaders in Pyongyang. But having said that, it's prudent for any business endeavor with any interest in the North or potential interest, and for that matter also NGOs, to have a plan to engage with the North in the event of returning to one country. And of course that entails both short and long-term plans. From the standpoint of business activity, the first thing is commitment. Recognize this is a long-term endeavor and that you're going to need partners. And I'll emphasize that a number of ways. Partners mean relationships, and that they need to be established now so that you're in place if the fortuitous situation arises when you can exploit opportunities in the North. From my point of view, the ideal partner is a Republic of Korea company that first has deep pockets and ideally has current connections to the North, and many of them do. What you want to be in a position is ready to move and exploit opportunities to develop. And we recognize that a trusting relationship with a another company or NGO or whatever the organization is not something that develops overnight. So start now. The role of China, this is the 500-pound gorilla. Was pointed out this morning is key, and you may very well end up, as the indication by Roger, the trading partner today is China. So you may end up with a Chinese partner as well as perhaps a ROK and even a Japanese partner. But the point is, any engagement with the North is going to be a multi-team company enterprise. Personally, I'm not the least bit convinced that China is at all interested in economic or social, on political grounds, for any type of near-term reunification. It's simply not in their interest to have an economic powerhouse on the Korean Peninsula that's enhanced with raw materials and labor from the North and a dynamic South. Also, China does not want a prosperous democracy on the Yalu River. You got to remember, Manchuria has a significant Korean minority. One speaker this morning did point out that there could possibly be a shift in the Chinese opinion in that regard, but it's going to take some delicate negotiating to move them to that position. As a multinational firm or a U.S. firm that's interested in future investment in the North, the first thing to consider is, what do you bring to the table that will be of interest to others? Whether your partner is a ROK, Chinese or Japanese partner, your company needs to have a good or service that's needed by these partners, or you're irrelevant. Also, any reunification is not going to be a partnership of equals, in my view. The South will simply overwhelm the North economically and otherwise. And like any merger, corporate or otherwise, there's one side always dominates, and I think the ROK will dominate this equation. Thus, the reason you should be developing ROK partners now, do business, get comfortable with those partner or partners, more than one, and be ready to move in the future. And oh, by the way, you'll be doing some good business in the meantime. So this is not necessarily a loss leader. Korea, North and South, we recognize, have a lot of similarities. One ethnicity, one language, big plus. But there's also striking differences, and these have been pointed out. Principally, 70 years of totally different economic and political development. And we have the last Stalinist regime in the North, with, central planning, state-run industries, and all that portends, compared to a democratic and flourishing South. And we saw when Rodgers numbers the gross differences in gross national product between the two, and that's why I feel that the South will predominate in any accommodation between the two. So we all know the background, but what's going to be the impact on potential business activity? At least initially, I would speculate that the political situation is going to be rather chaotic. We have a state-run economy, could be in shambles, workers and managers not used to competitive, dynamic business environment, so there's a lot of adjustment that's going to have to be made. Most infrastructure that you would be looking for is going to be lacking or out of date, including telecoms, banking, finance, professional services, and especially supply chain activities that would support new business ventures. So there's going to be no quick fix, and thus the importance of having a ROK or some other partner to help navigate this landscape is going to be critical. It's going to be a decade-long process, adjustment. And we can look at the example, as was mentioned, East Germany and the former Eastern Bloc states. There was no quick fix there, and they're still adjusting to change in that venue. Now, one hopes that there'd be good governance will emerge in the North, but that's not a given. We have the examples of Eastern Europe where the mafia and other nefarious activities emerged in the wake of the Soviet dissolution. You see reports about the attraction in the North being cheap labor. Well, yes, there's labor available, but really you have to look at that composition of that labor force. First, it's predominantly rural and agricultural. Formal education levels are low, and there are reportedly significant nutritional and health issues that would have to be addressed, especially in the short run. Granted, there's a top layer of well-educated elites who have done a good job developing nuclear weapons. They do an excellent job on cyber hacking. Perhaps those skills can be redeployed to something a little more productive. The attraction, I feel, of cheap labor is a little bit of a myth, especially in mass consumption products or mass production. With artificial intelligence and robotics, the percentage of labor, low-level labor, in any finished product is steadily diminishing. And such that cheap labor alone is not going to be a reason to start an endeavor in the North. That's my approach. Most investment discussions in the North, of course, reference the hydro potential, its extractive industries, mining, and the need for critical infrastructure. True, but there's also a significant consumer product void, assuming that the North starts to prosper. And this is an area ripe for ROK and other offshore products. The consumer side of the economy likely would be slow to start, but there would eventually be a huge demand for consumer products of all types as the economy starts to roll. And most of the published reports emphasize cheap labor, access to hydropower. The assumption seems to be that you're going to be manufacturing for export or taking out raw materials. Think of it another way. Turn it around. There'll be a consumer void that's going to be filled by someone, and it's not to be overlooked. What do you do with state-run industries? North Korea is the last Stalinist economy, centrally run, state ownership of the means of production, the classic stuff, and with a focus on defense-related activities. That's really what they do best. When one looks at the attempts in the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe on restructuring government-run industries, the results are very checkered, and there's not too many success stories. So that's going to be a major issue. Can these state-run industries be reconstructed, or do they simply just have to be abandoned? I would expect a low-hanging fruit initially will be extractive industries, because the mines are already there, and taking over government-run activities such as utilities and infrastructure. But as was pointed out, all these sectors will require huge infusions of capital to modernize and get the basic infrastructure in place to carry on more advanced development. When we address activities associated with unification, we don't want to overlook the role of NGOs. This is the soft, if you will, side of reunification. We tend to focus on, the business side, infrastructure, physical plant, roads, bridges, airfields, and that sort of thing. That's a critical part, but there's a huge need for social, economic, educational, health, good governance, you name it. Remember, the North has experienced 70 years of state central control under only 3 leaders. So the requirement to adapt to very dissimilar political and economic cultures is going to be a huge challenge. And NGOs can play a major role, I feel, in that process. Also, not to be overlooked, the role of churches in social, educational, health, political development. In the ROK, there are many powerful churches with constituents who are second or third generation refugees from the North. So that's another element when we start looking at the players in reunification and who can be effective in this environment. I've seen analogies drawn between the reunification of the Federal Republic of Germany and East Germany and the similar activities on the Korean Peninsula, and I think that was mentioned earlier. Both situations have a similar language and the same language and similar ethnic conditions. And they required integration of 2 dissimilar, social, economic, and political systems. But there's a major difference here, and that's in the case of Germany, the Soviet Union was in disarray, and the Soviets were the guarantors of East German sovereignty. They hadn't completely gone away, but they were no longer the player they were in the past. In the case of the Korean Peninsula and reunification, China is the benefactor and guarantor of the North, and, as was pointed out with Rodgers' chart, the predominant economic connection, and as well as political. And if anything, China is more truculent, more powerful, more capable of interfering than they've ever been. Thus, that analogy of German reunification can give us some insights and sort of major issues to be addressed, but I don't think it's a cookie cutter model, and there's glaring differences, especially in who's behind the curtain in both cases. In conclusion, reunification of the North will offer benefits to companies willing to plan. First of all, of course, it's going to be ROK companies, but secondly, to outside companies, multinationals, and others who are willing to plan ahead, take risks, and potentially reap the benefits of a revitalized North. These are really just some simple thoughts on the challenges and possibilities for business and economic development in Korean reunification. I'm sure there are a lot of other aspects that we could get into, and I look forward to comments from the other panel members and then participating in the discussion following that. Again, Roger, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Short. Your points are very pertinent, and I especially like the ideas of how there need to be other organizations involved in this process. We need to bring in social organizations. We need to bring in churches and other groups in order to help with any process of uniting the two Koreas together in an economic sense. So our next speaker, Dr. William Imeke, is going to continue a little bit on that theme. And I think he's a professor at Columbia University in the practice of international affairs, the School of Public and International Affairs. And he teaches courses in management, cross-sector partnerships, meaning like public-private partnerships and working with different types of organizations, applied policy analysis, and innovation. And he also teaches at Peking University and the Universidad Externado de Colombia. I apologize for mangling that. And he has also been the co-author of a book called Social Value Investing, together with Howard Buffett, who is also on the faculty at Columbia. So welcome, Dr. Imeke. Sorry, you're still on mute, Dr. Imeke.
How many times have I made that mistake?
Haven't we all? Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you so much. And thanks to my fellow panelists for all the wisdom that they've portrayed. And I'll try not to repeat it, but reinforce it and maybe add a couple of things. The themes that jump out to me are cross-sector partnerships, including all three sectors. I think that's critical. And I agree with Colonel and everyone else who spoke about that, with South Korean partners being essential. But the third sector, the social sector, the religious sector, can play an extraordinary role. And in fact, in our book, we talk about the growth in places like India and Brazil, which have had very rapid development using, in many respects, cross-sector partnerships. I do think, yes, it's not a cookie cutter, but the East and West Germany example, having been old enough to see it from both sides, there was a great deal of skepticism. Even in the early years, people thought this will never work. And here we are with Germany being a juggernaut. And I would say it has been extraordinarily successful. And as an optimist by nature, I'm hopeful that the same kinds of growth and development can happen there. I'm going to be on a part of a conference and on a panel with a joint conference we have annually with Peking University in Beijing. This will be our 5th annual conference on Thursday. And we're talking about things like governance and the exact topics we're discussing today. And it's, just one man's opinion of hearing conversations I'm not at all convinced that China would oppose reunification and growth. They spend a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of credit, their international credit, defending a regime that I don't think they're all that excited about. So if the Koreas could become a good trading partner, and that cost, not only as Jim Rodgers pointed out, the extraordinarily wasteful cost of preparing for war that you don't want to go to, could be more properly and better, more beneficially deployed for economic purposes, I think we'd be in good shape. Maybe my value added is because I'm a political scientist and I'm somewhat involved in politics in the US, to talk maybe a little bit about what the future administration and political alignment in Washington is likely to look like after January. And despite, I think, aggressive efforts by soon-to-be former President Trump to make gains with North Korea, it didn't work out. I am hopeful, actually, that a more moderate approach that I suspect President Biden and his administration will take will be more beneficial. I think if you look at the long history of soon-to-be President Biden, he's a moderate. He's an internationalist. He's known around the globe. I think he's respected from both sides of the aisle. I think he's likely to be less aggressive in dealing with China, for good or for bad, depending on your point of view. I think he's likely to be less aggressive in his policies toward North Korea, good or bad. I think he's likely to return to traditional allies and collaboration, whether it be the EU or Japan or the UK and or all of these. So I'm anticipating a more calm, reasoned foreign policy from the US, which I think will actually strengthen our voice in Asia and strengthen our voice with China. So as a full-time political scientist and part-time economist, I believe that if you align people's personal interests and their economic interests, they'll tend to go with it. People, at least at a minimum, are a little bit selfish and very family and tribe-oriented. So if you can construct a situation where everybody wins, you're likely to be successful. And I think Asia, I agree with Jim Rodgers, Asia is the future of the next 30 years. That's where the fastest growth is going to happen. But we sit here where I sit in the US in an enviable position. We're the biggest by a good measure right now. And actually, I think we may decrease our lead, but have still the biggest share of a very, very, very big pie. And I guess the last thing I would say is the issue of values and trust and respect, the core values that Roger, your organization represents, are critical for the future. I think we can underestimate the role that the social, philanthropic, and religious sector can play. And I just cite as a small example, President Bush, for the first time, established the eligibility for religious affiliated organizations to participate in governmental programs, as long as they separated their religious and charitable arms, if you will. And it was enormously successful, particularly in areas like housing and social development and job training. And when he transitioned out, President Obama not only didn't eliminate that relationship, but doubled down on it and actually grew the White House's role and encouragement for partnerships, cross-sector partnerships between religious organizations, social organizations, business, and the government. And I think we can see the same thing operating in South Korea and North Korea. Hopefully someday we'll be saying, like we say Germany, we'll be saying Korea. So I'll conclude there and turn it over to you, Roger.
Thank you very much, Dr. Imeke. Very pertinent comments. One of the things that I really love about IAED and UPF in general is that we are able to interact with such a broad range of people from different disciplines and different perspectives. And certainly with our next speaker, Miss Purnima Voria, I got to meet her in Korea earlier this year and was deeply impressed with what she has accomplished in her life. She is the CEO and founder of the National U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce, which has a direct membership of approximately 9,200 worldwide. It's a big organization. She's a motivational speaker, business owner, educator, and an expert on India. And her efforts have resulted in increases in trade between the U.S. and India, and increased exports of U.S. products into India and other joint ventures. And she brings a unique perspective on what a reunified Korea would look like. So I'm very happy to introduce Ms. Purnima Voria.
Good morning, namaste, and kamsahamnida for having me on the show. And to all my astute speakers, what a wonderful dialogue to have in midst of COVID, in midst of crisis across the world. This is an opportunity for us to make a difference. India is going to lead the 21st century. It's going to be a manufacturing hub from distribution point of view in Asia. So India plays a significant role. And I am so glad that we are discussing something that I'm very passionate about, is India's role in peace building in Korean Peninsula. It is significant. Why? Because from treating the wounded from both the sides of Korean War to surprisingly today, supporting the peace process, India is standing out. And not just for Korea, but across the nations. And the recent Quad countries coming together, whether it's US, India, Korea, what have you, Japan. I mean, these are the reasons. The border tensions and security of every country is very vital to the entire globe. And that is why conferences like that and webinars like that are extremely important. And I'm very grateful to IAED for taking the lead in this, and congratulations to this new organization. Today, not many people know that when it was Korean War, over estimated 220,000 patients were there from both the sides, were treated by medical ambulances units serving in Korea. And I'm talking about India helping with that. Pyongyang recent decision to cut off all the lines of communication with Seoul over its inability to control the anti-North activities in the South had made the task a little bit more difficult for Moon. If he still is serious about reviving this, India can play a significant role, but they have to leave the complex issue related to denuclearization for a later date. So let's see what we can do at the present time. Korean War, hordes of foreign power rushed in after that. So there were a lot of people eyeing on Korea, the North Korea and South Korea both. The US and China jumped into the fight for regional dominance. Why am I saying all this? Because originally Koreans had just a very single ideology, and the ideology of nationalism. That was challenged because of the outside forces, outside ideology that was thrust on Koreans, and not that they had chosen it. I believe Koreans have a culture, they are peaceful, their culture plays a significant role on who they are. And I think that can be utilized for future peace processes. Now, I would say that US influence is also coming into a big play. So is China. Do we want to be a China-led Korea, or do we want to be a US-led Korea? I don't think either. I think Korea, if North and South comes together, they can itself become a very significant player in the world. And they are one of the top when it comes to economic development. So I believe that independently, South and North Korea must make efforts to come together. The two Koreas, being strong and independent nations, now do not have to choose between the two rival camps. And the new allies carve their own path, and they can reject everyone. Now, where does this lie in the importance of countries that have no vested interest in the region, but that would like Korea Peninsula to be unified? Now, I can very firmly, optimistically say India has been a champion of peace and nonviolence. It played a major role in the resolution of conflict in the Korean War, and it still has the capacity to do so today. It is time Koreans start taking the role of India in peace building very, very seriously. India resisted the proposed draft resolution. As you know, the breach of peace is what they called it in the United Nations rather than act of aggression. So you see how diplomatically India heals the relationships between the countries that are differing from each other. India refused to send military forces at times, but helped through field of medical ambulances and so forth. India was the only country, is the only country that both South and North Korea can trust. So it's very important that we rely on India on this. India immediately welcomes all the important decision-making that happens as long as they are nonviolent and peaceful. India is a little bit different when it comes to the nuclear proliferation and so forth. But that is something I think India has to take a little bit back seat on, and they cannot drive the decisions. Both the South and North Korea have to look into that. Most of the time, India's role has been just as a passing by nation, but no, I think India is very significant, and now more than ever, we have to look at it very seriously. India's role during Korean War acknowledged never-ending and sincere efforts in peace building of Korea. India and South Korea started coming close together again at the end of the Cold War. Trade ties between two countries are becoming, as they aim for bilateral trade, 50 billion by 2030. So this is a very good reason as well, because economic development helps the peace process. When there is economic development in the countries are doing good, GDP is high, they tend to look more towards peace because they are well-fed, well taken care of. So I think that is also going to take, the trade ties are going to be very, very significant between North Korea, South Korea, and they are already doing that at this time, but it can be enhanced. Lately, India has been showing great interest in peace building in the peninsula and emerging as part of the core agenda for the Indian South and North Korean strategic partnerships. As 10 years ago, they started an Indian Cultural Center in South Korea. That was very helpful because cultural awareness, understanding, tolerance, getting to know each other is going to play a significant role in this unification of both the nations. The Indian government has declared full support to President Moon's peace overtures to North Korea and is offering to play a mediator role. Let's take that offer since it's requested to us. It is prepared to go an extra mile to complete unfinished tasks of Korean War and peacefully unifying the Korean Peninsula, despite of the best efforts of international community to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons on Korean Peninsula. North Korea has succeeded in acquiring them, and we all know that. This has brought a little bit threat of to nuclear obliteration to the doorstep of Korean people, and not only Korean people. The peace process has become more urgent to other nations as well, because it is going to have a devastating effect in the entire region. India, which has strong economic relations with South Korea, would be badly hurt with such a war. Thus, India shares its concern on the nuclear war, building peace on the Korean Peninsula, and we start making collective efforts in this direction. I think it's today when we have to do that, and we have just made this as a great start in this webinar. The intent here is not to rehash historical triumphs. While India is transmitted as non-alignment to multi-alignment, it continues to have the ability to engage with a wide range of states and countries and positively contribute to the brokering of the peace in Korean Peninsula. We can maintain a very strong dialogue with Beijing and we can improve significantly. Since the turn of the century, US-India relations have become very, very strong as well. Similarly, along the prosperous economic ties with South Korea, India has also lesser known, somewhat friendly relationship with North Korea. And opportunities in space, science, technology, education in Asia, Pacific. In Dehradun, one of the regions of India, there were training that was taken by North Koreans in 1996, and graduates of this institute have gone to not only imply a swift resolution to the problem of denuclearization, but demilitarization as well. And with the flow of the information and increased efficiency of bilateral communication, encourage symmetry, dialogue, confidence building measures, and provide neutral third party would carry out monitoring functions in case of an agreement. And from narrow point of view, I would say initiatives would reaffirm India's bona fide as a responsible stakeholder in international society and significantly improve its system level prestige. India has already expressed concern over North Korea's nuclear tests, negatively appraised its consequences for the regional peace and security, and a more prominent role is what India is seeking. In global public goods like security, India must step forward and embrace wider responsibility. And I think I'll end with that. Opportunities are immense, and I think during the question and answer session, we'll talk more about these. Thank you, and namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much. That was, I learned a lot there about India's role in working with both South Korea and North Korea, and I was especially, moved by your mention of culture as an important part of that. Both Reverend and Mrs. Moon have always emphasized how important cultural exchange is in order to create peace in the world, and have set up, dance troupes and choirs and international cultural associations to accomplish that as well.
And I must add one last thing, which is fifth industrial revolution. We all are in the fifth industrial revolution, and humanitarian touch or humanity embracing each other is going to drive the economic development of the world. So that human element that fifth revolution brings, we have no choice, but believe me, it is going to be, that human element is going to be the unification of South and North Korea. I am very optimistic about it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So we're going to go into our panel discussion part, and we do have some questions from the audience. If other people would like to submit questions, I would ask that you please put them into the Q&A window rather than the chat window. It makes it a little easier for me to manage them. But anyway, we'll try and get to both. There are some coming in different places. I also posted a link into the chat window for everybody where you can sign up if you would like to get additional information about IAED. So we are planning to hold additional webinars in the future. We're looking to form an organization, a network of people where we can communicate with each other. We can do events, on a local level, especially after this, pandemic subsides and we're able to meet together. It's, really wonderful to be able to get together in a local meeting and do things. So we really want to build an organization throughout the US. So please sign up on that link. And if you have friends and contacts that you would like to invite to join as well, then please feel free to forward that link onto them as well with a little explanation. So now let's bring everybody back on screen. We have everybody here already, right? And let's look to some of these questions. So I have the first question here comes from Joshua Holmes, and I'm going to put this first to maybe Colonel Short, and then maybe Cliff Stearns, if you would like to comment as well. And he says, could you elaborate on why reunification would be more beneficial conclusion versus simply North Korea opening up its borders and becoming a free market economy as a separate entity to South Korea? So keep separate nations, but just open up.
when we look at scenarios, I think, there's a continuum of, on one hand, two semi-co-equal but open Koreas to full integration. What will evolve? I don't know. Perhaps, there's a series of steps from where we are now to separate but equal, if you will, and then into more integration and hopefully total integration at some point. The government in the North, of course, is narrowly based and in my view, fragile. And change in a Stalinist system is very difficult. Difficult for the leadership to accept and to keep their desired degree of control. So I think there's a continuum that we really can't forecast as to. The goal is reunification in some mode. The model, who knows? There are a lot of players and there are a lot of potential solutions. Anything that moves the ball forward, I think, is useful. Whether that's social integration, as was pointed out, whether that's NGO activity, church activity, commercial activity, anything that breaks down barriers between the North and the South over time is constructive. The track record hasn't been too good. Attempts at, industrial development of these small zones and so forth turned out to be more propaganda than reality and were shut down. But anyway, you don't stop trying because you failed in the past. I think that's the mantra.
Thank you. And Cliff, would you like to comment on that as well? You're on mute again. Sorry, you need to unmute.
There's 2 points I would like to say. People should realize that a lot of the property was confiscated by North Korea after the treaty that established the North and South. And then a lot of the people in South Korea want reinstitution of their property that was confiscated by them. So that would have to be worked out. And it might be a sticking point if they tried to establish a separate country. The second thing is, when I've been into South Korea numerous times, there's lots of people there that still have relatives and they want to see it free and they want to be able to have access. And I think that the country residents want to be one country and not two separate countries. And I think they feel strongly when I talk to them, they think in terms of their country almost predominantly as one country, and they want it that way, and they don't want two separate free enterprise zones.
Thank you. Do you think that there may be some differences between the older and younger generation in that respect?
Well, yes. When you talk to a person in South Korea, they're not interested so much in getting rich or, shall we say, some of the American dream aspects that we have. They talk about their country as the most important thing. And when they talk about their country, they talk about it in terms of North and South coming together. I think both, certainly the older generation feels that way, but I have a sense when I talk to some of the younger people, they would be able to say, I would like to talk with my generation in North Korea.
Thank you. So our next question, I'm going to direct to Purnima, first of all. So given your experience, setting up an international business organization between India and the United States, what do you think would be the process for setting up a trade fair with representatives of North Korea and all the other nations? For example, we could do something in Delhi, which is a country that's accessible to both countries, where you could have an international trade fair with exhibitions from both North and South Korea. You need to unmute yourself. Don't forget about that.
Yeah.
I think it's an excellent idea. I would say not New Delhi, but in Mumbai, because that's the financial hub. So location Mumbai would be great. North Korea, I was very fortunate to attend trade fair in New Delhi at Leela's Hotel, which is a 5-star hotel, a couple of years ago. And my brother told me about it. And there is an organization called KOTA, Korean Trade Organization. And it was very strange that they were all trying to do business with my brother. And I was very excited because I didn't know that, we could do that. But this was a couple of years ago. And when I talked to them, I was telling my brother in Hindi that, oh, propose this, propose that. And guess what? After the whole conversation, I find out they knew Hindi. They knew exactly what I was telling my brother. So, the cultural barrier is kind of, it's no longer a foreign country. The whole globe is coming together. And this is an excellent way of having a trade conference along with cultural sharing. So maybe Korean dances, Korean music, in India, in Mumbai, along with Indian music. I think it would be a perfect setting to host this at a neutral place, which is India, because India is seen very respectfully by Korea as well as South and North Korea both. And since Prime Minister Modi has opened his arms to being an intermediate to bring peace and unification between both the nations, I think he would be a great opening speaker at this effort.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. The next question I have is, I think I'm going to open this to anybody who would like to respond. If you want to respond, just put your hand up, okay? What specific sectors of business do you think would be the best ones to successfully initiate opening the border to economic exchange? For example, should it be technology, agriculture, manufacturing, etc.? What do you think? Anybody like to have a go at that first? Oh, we've got 2 volunteers. Let's try Cliff Stearns first.
Cliff first.
Yeah.
I'll just briefly say, right now, North Korea is they're manufacturing in steel and weapons and armament, and that would have to change. And perhaps what's going to initially happen is they're going to be in manufacturing of textiles and perhaps tennis shoes and things like that. So I would think that would be the transition until they get the place sort of more highly developed.
Mm-hmm. And Panima?
I believe North and South Korea both have significant assets. If you combine both, unify both of them, they would surpass China when it comes to resources in the country. So they have, it's an immense opportunity Korea has if they come together, and they can be, I wouldn't say they will rule the world, but I can still say they can be a significant player in the economic development of global economy. So I would say from my side, textile is one thing that India is also very good at. So that is a similarity. But I see more of the opportunities in defense and aerospace sector. That is where I would be looking for opportunities with South and North Korea.
Okay. We have another question from Robert Sell, which kind of relates to what you were just expressing about Korea being bigger than China. Unified Korea would actually be more powerful than China. That might be kind of scary to China, right?
Yes.
So what can we do to incentivize China to help with unifying these 2 Koreas together? Does anybody
I think economic development is the way we can do that. I'm sorry, I didn't know if I was to answer, but
go ahead.
But economic development is the first thing that comes to mind, and that human element we talked about, the 5th Industrial Revolution, by putting that human touch, the cultural bonding together, whether it's with Indian cuisine and Korean cuisine, or it is with the dance, the music, the religious aspect. Because I feel that same thing happened to us in Kashmir. Kashmiri Pandits were thrown out. My heart goes out to Koreans when they have not seen their relatives for many, many years. I think it is time, and the younger generation can play a key role in making that happen, because they do not go back to the wars and what happened and who did what. But today, younger generation wants economic development, and they want the families to come together, because the nation of Korea was built on exactly that, the family values and unity.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Imeke and then Tom, you can answer.
Just say quickly that I think China actually would welcome a stronger Korea from a business point of view. They already know a lot of the players. There's a lot of tourism between North Korea and China. So they have a lot of the networks, contacts. I think they'd feel more than able to compete on a global stage for business from either a unified Korea or a independently more developed North Korea.
Can I make just a comment? I agree with Dr. Imeke. I think also that one of the biggest needs of China right now in its growth and its aggressiveness is its global reputation. It's no mystery that China's doing some things that are unfair in many ways. I think when we think about the global network that IAED and UPF and the multi-sector, Dr. Imeke, one of your key areas of the multi-sector work of faith and business and media and the political side, I'm thinking of the dozens of countries that China is deeply invested in who have very rich backgrounds with the UPF network. And I'm fascinated by the potential of a global network of countries that are multi-sector that could paint the picture of a vision of the future that would be the best case for China and the best case for the US and the best case for North Korea, and a messaging framework that could paint that vision of peace based on universal values. It sounds simple, but I think it's getting to the point where we could really substantiate that. So the incentive to China could come by, in one sense, UPF and its many partners doing this work consistently over the next couple of years, change the whole global image of what's possible.
I couldn't agree with you more.
I could make one comment on that. One of the stated concerns of China with regard to reunification in whatever model or mode is the U.S. military presence in the Korean Peninsula, and backing that up, of course, is the U.S. Nuclear capabilities. There's no reason why that couldn't be put on the table as part of an omnibus settlement whereby we denuclearize and remove U.S. forces from Korea. Let's face it, a united, peaceful Korea where we do not have an aggressive North, tunneling across the border and doing other provocative actions. There's no reason to keep U.S. troops in Korea now, 50-some years? More than that. So I think that some adept diplomacy, some behind-the-scenes discussions with China, perhaps things could change in the Chinese perception. Perhaps they would want to denuclearize. They may not want an errant young man with a bunch of nukes in the North with ICBMs. You want predictability in this world. We don't want unpredictability. And I think there are some factors that could move the Chinese to a position where they would accept some type of accommodation. And of course, we would have to move as also. The wild card is the North Koreans, and I was involved in those negotiations with Bush too, have never complied with one agreement that they have made ever, period. So they got a lot of baggage to unload and start complying in small ways. They don't have to, open the doors and to everything, but they need to show constructive compliance over a long period of time in a lot of venues. It was brought up, for example, the reunification issue of families North and South. That could be done tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Open the borders up, let people travel back and forth, let families unite, and let that go on for a period of time. Anyway, I think there's a matrix of activities that could help to move it along. I'm not that keen on multi-power negotiations. I think they oftentimes national policies get in the way of solutions. I think that on one hand, the North and the South themselves are adults and could should be able to work out their own issues with us, the Chinese, the Russians, the Japanese, and others in the background as supporting actors, facilitating a final solution. But anyway, that's just some thoughts that I have.
Yes, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you to all of our distinguished panelists. Mr. McDivitt and I have been to Korea on a number of occasions with fact finders, and we were encouraged to find out that the general sentiment in the North and the South is they do want the unification of Korea. It's one culture that has a 4,300-year history, and it has all the same cultural traditions. The introduction of communism after World War II was an unnatural governmental control system, and it is not natural for the people, and they're not prospering. They're not happy under this. Yes, there are young people in the South that are not that excited about unifying with North Korea, but we've heard that it's more because of the economic concerns. It will be a tremendous strain on South Korea to bring that unification. So a lot can be learned from East and West Germany. But I know Dr. Moon, our founder, who escaped from North Korea, it's a burning desire in her heart for the sake of all her, her countrymen to bring that great country together again.
Yes.
And I think also China definitely does not want a nuclear North Korea. They do not want that because it can just cause more trouble, and causes Japan to want to have a nuclear weapon and so forth. Thank you.
So we're coming very close to the end of our time here. I just wanted to give everybody 20 seconds to kind of give some closing statements before we wrap up here. Okay, I'll give you 30. Okay, 30 seconds. So I like to go in kind of reverse order from how people spoke. So let's start with ladies first. Ms. Panima Voria.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was a wonderful dialogue that we had. I wish very well, and best wishes to IAED. I think they can play a significant role with economic development piece of it. North Korea specifically, I would say reunification gives access to cheap labor and abundant natural resources in North, which combined with existing technology and capital in the South would create a large economic and military growth potential. And with that, I thank you and I wish well, and I hope this happens in our lifetime, the unification of North and South Korea. And if I can play a significant role in helping Michael Jensen and Jenkins and Tom and all of you in any capacity, I would love to do that. And I will encourage my Prime Minister and leaders as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Imeke, would you like to go next? Don't forget to unmute. Yes.
I finally figured that out. I'll be brief. I learned a lot today, so my appreciation to my fellow panelists, and I'm even more optimistic about the future of the Korean Peninsula than I was before I came in. Thank you. And thank you to IAED for having this forum and making it available.
Thank you. And next, Colonel Short, would you like to give a few remarks?
Well, Tom and Michael, thanks very much for allowing me to participate. My compliments to UFP and IAED for putting this together. This is a look into the future. And, there's a lot of scenarios out there, but I think with the morning session and now the afternoon, we've explored some interesting ideas. And thanks again.
Thank you very much. And Cliff Stearns.
Yeah, Roger, thank you very much. I'm just delighted to participate in this panel, and for UPF and the Washington Times Foundation for sponsoring it. I think it's exhilarating to think that we could have the unification of these two countries. And I think, as I mentioned, through the Baltic and East and West Germany, and even what was done in other countries like Poland and Hungary who transitioned, there's a theoretical model to do this, and let's hope and pray it happens. And may the good Lord take a liking to all of you, but not too soon.
Thank you. And let's give Tom and then Dr. Jenkins a chance to say a few words.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. Excellent job, Roger. This could be on primetime television. When I think of Congressman Cliff Stearns, a former president of the Association of Former Members of Congress, and Dr. Imeke with the hundreds of academic colleagues you have, and Al Short with similar in the business field. He's building hospitals in Africa. He could build hospitals in Korea. And Purnima with about 10,000 companies. I know I speak for the IAED team globally. We would love to get you folks involved. Help us shape strategy over the next couple years. Imagine the kind of thing we could do to build this at scale. And we're also thinking of taking the kind of content we've shared today and this morning and republishing that in special sections in the Washington Times. And thanks so much to everybody on the chat and everything. I know people all over the world are there. Even Edie Iverson from France is there, Cliff. She says hello. So,
oh, good. Anyway. Good. Hello to Edie. Edie,
I'll tell you what, it's a pleasure working with Larry and especially Mike Jenkins, Dr. Jenkins. This is a great leadership team. We can make an impact. So I'll hand it back to you, Roger. Thanks.
Oh, Dr. Jenkins first.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. This is congratulations on a great session. And Roger, thank you. And Chairman McDivitt, Chairman of the Times, we're proud of your leadership. IAED is not only here in the United States, but just think about, we have a component in Africa, country by country, 54 nations, and then the whole continent. We've got all of Asia, all of Europe, Middle East, Eastern Europe. It's really amazing. I realized today, what if this association continues to grow? So I know that you have many colleagues in business that can really see the vision of moral and also ethical leadership in business to really influence the world to be a better place. So thank you very much. Congratulations.
So thank you very much to all of our distinguished panelists. Everybody's contribution is really a step in the right direction for us to be able to make a change in the world. And I truly believe that as we speak these words, as we make this thought, this idea, a popular one in the world, we are going to transform the world, and we will see the unification of Korea in our lifetime. Just as we never thought that Germany would come together, we never thought that the USSR would collapse, and then within a couple of years it happened. I am sure that it can happen so quickly and unexpectedly. So thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay.
Roger, is the recording of the conference available for people if they want to rewatch it?
Yes, it will be made available. It's available on our UPF Facebook page if they want to see it, if they want to share it. They can go to just search for Universal Peace Federation USA, and then you will be able to share the conference from there. Okay.
And it will be edited and put up on YouTube also.
That's great, Larry. And I also noticed about a dozen questions that we didn't get a chance to tackle. Maybe we can facilitate some way to respond to some of those questions.
Roger, I'd like to also recognize our North American Secretary General, Larry Moffett. He is the one that connects us all together. He has communicated with every U.S. president, and he communicates with all of us. Thank you, Larry.
And,
thank you, Larry.
Dr. Jenkins, Al Jensen is on the phone. He's on by phone too, your North American coordinator.
Hello.
Why don't you go ahead and mention him? Yeah.
North American coordinator, Alan Jessen. Great work, Alan. Thank you, Roger.
Great job. Great job.
Thank you.